I'm standing right outside the home of the 8th President of the United States, Martin Van Buren, and we're going to check his home out today as well as his hometown of Kinderhook, New York. This part of New York was settled in large part by Dutch settlers, so it makes sense that the town's name is a Dutch term. Kinderhook, in Dutch, means children's corner, with the name first appearing on a map of the Hudson River in 1615. While the root of the name is not fully known, legend has it that Henry Hudson was greeted by native children curious to see his sailing vessel when he passed through the area on his expeditions. Kinderhook has a connection with many significant historical figures, including being the hometown of President Martin Van Buren. It is also the town that inspired multiple characters and locations in the legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, including the character of Ichabod Crane and the Von Tassel Farm. More on all of these properties later. Kinderhook was never a very industrial town, perhaps because it didn't have a great water power source for mills and such. There have been a few industrial ventures here, though, including a sawmill that likely created the timbers for the early structures here, hat manufacturing, and at one point, a carriage factory. Kinderhook has long had a history of creating notable attorneys and doctors, creating a high-end legacy for this area that seems to me visible just by walking the streets. Many of the houses are grand and look like they could tell numerous stories of those that lived in them and visited them. It is apparent that this area was very well-to-do in its time and in many respects still is today. Kinderhook seemingly has quite a few artists in the area today, perhaps in part because of the presence of The School, a large school art exhibition space run by Jack Shainman, named for being housed in an old school building here in town. Other little studios and art galleries are located throughout the town as well. Kinderhook has multiple historic sites, including the James Vanderpoel House, built in 1819. Vanderpoel was a prominent lawyer and judge in the 1800s. The house was not open during my visit to town since it is only open seasonally, but tours of the house are available in the warmer months. There is also the Columbia County Museum right in the center of the downtown area, but again, it was closed during my visit to town. Of course it was, right? That always seems to be my luck. However, there were lots of interesting sites still to visit that although they may not have been open to interior tours, they were still available for walks around the exterior, which I definitely did. Ichabod Crane, the protagonist and schoolmaster in the legend of Sleepy Hollow, was patterned after a real man, Mr. Jesse Merwin, a one-room schoolhouse teacher in Kinderhook. The school building that he taught in, a log cabin-style building, was replaced by this building in about 1850. This building remained a public school building until the 1940s, when the school district became centralized. The building would serve as a community center in the 1950s and 60s, visited in 1952 by Eleanor Roosevelt, who in a radio address praised the works of women who had preserved the schoolhouse from disrepair. In 1974, the schoolhouse was moved just 200 yards down the road to this location and restored to its 1930 appearance. Interestingly, the local school district is still called the Ichabod Crane Central School District today, a nod to the fictitious character as well as the real man that inspired him, Jesse Merwin. The Ichabod Crane School is now on the same grounds as the Luykas Van Alen House, a Dutch farmhouse built all the way back in 1737. This is one of less than a dozen examples of Dutch colonial houses in the Hudson Valley. Over 7 generations of Van Alens lived in the house. The steep roof and unique entrance styles with 2-part doors, along with benches on both sides of the door, make this a true example of Dutch architecture. Today, the house sits on 33 acres of property with a pond and a Dutch farming heritage trail that extends from the Van Alen House all the way to Lindenwald, the retirement home of President Martin Van Buren. I didn't walk the trail, but I did visit Lindenwald. Van Buren was the 8th President of the United States, creating the independent treasury, being blamed for the Panic of 1837, and opposing the annexation of Texas because of political concerns. He was nicknamed the Red Fox of Kinderhook, born in 1782 in the tavern owned by his father here in Kinderhook. Since he was born here, where the majority of people spoke Dutch, he was the only president to serve our nation for which English was not his first language. President Van Buren served in the highest political office in our nation from 1837 to 1841. During the middle of his presidency, he purchased this beautiful brick 36-room mansion in his native Kinderhook. He lived here from the time that he left office until his death in 1862. His deathbed is still in the house today, which can be seen when inside tours are offered seasonally by the National Park Service, which maintains this property. The house was situated on the main post road from New York to Albany. There is a portion of the original road unimproved as it would have looked in its day, showing how transportation would have been in those days. Since he was on the main drag, many politicians and public figures of the day would have stopped in to speak with Van Buren here, including operating 2 unsuccessful presidential campaigns from this house in the years following his first and only presidential term. This was an active farm in Van Buren's day, and there are numerous signs showing what that would have been like. The farmhands would have either lived in town and commuted down, or some of the help would have lived in the gatehouses that sat at either end of the U-shaped drive in front of the house. One of those houses still stands here today. The other is represented by a foundation where it would have sat. All of Van Buren's living sons would eventually have rooms in the house and lived here as well with their wives and children, meaning that this wasn't just President Van Buren's home, but his extended family as well, with children running around and social meetings of all kinds happening here. Like him or hate him, you have to admit that his taste in homes was quite grand, and Lindenwald continues to stand as an example of fine architecture from that period. The National Park Service has a seasonal visitor center here, but of course, I visited in the off-season. There are plenty of signs throughout the property, though, that tell the story of the house, the land, and the Van Buren family, which I felt satisfied to have seen, although it would have been nice to tour the inside as well. Maybe I will return someday to see the inside. President Van Buren is buried with his wife in a cemetery on the opposite side of town. The gravesite is easily accessible, only a few rows of plots away from the roadside. Kinderhook is a very nice-looking community with rich history apparent everywhere you turn. It has maintained a small-town feeling, but has grandeur and old-school elegance that will leave you thinking about this town long after you visit. We'll see you next time somewhere else down the road.